Scotty. He's our speaker here. And I think we still have a couple outside that are still manning the table. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to the panel and allow them to introduce themselves. And we'll probably start right here with Senator Fulcher.
Hello, and thank you for coming tonight. My name is Russ Fulcher. I'm from Meridian, and I'm Legislative District 22, State Senator. Been in the Senate since 2005, and it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having us.
My name is Thayn. I'm a state senator. First term as a state senator, but I was 6 years in the House. And this is very gratifying to see everybody come out tonight. And hopefully you'll enjoy yourselves and learn something, and you'll interact with us, and we can have a good discussion.
I'm Senator Steve Vick, District 2. I just live about 5 miles north of here in Dalton Gardens, and I'm in my second term in the Idaho Senate.
And I'm Barbieri, and I'm in the minority here. Senators, I don't know how they got me here, the representative in the 2nd District along with Steve. And this is my second term. Look forward to the discussion.
So some of you might be wondering, what is MP squared? What does that mean? Well, MP squared means motivating people to become more productive. And for a better definition, we'll allow Senator Thayn to explain it.
Thank you very much, Dirk, and really appreciate you moderating this. I think there's probably a couple of people you should introduce here. Aren't there some dignitaries and representatives and chairman, members of the board of the NIC?
There are. I wasn't sure if I had them all. I know that we have a former representative in Ron Bieselmeyer here. I know we have Representative Ron Mendive back there. I know we have Todd Banducci, who is NIC Board of Trustees. Am I missing anybody? Okay, I'm just going to take it that we got everybody. So yes, thank you, Senator, and with that, if you'd like to proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, MP squared, this is something that we started sometime this summer. It does stand for motivating people to become more productive. And really what motivated us to do this is we want to change the political discussion. We want to change political discussion from criticizing and assigning blame to actually finding solutions. Also very concerned about sliding into economic decline. One of my big concerns is that we have taxation without representation. And what do I mean by that? We have so much national debt right now that we are using as adults to pay for our current expenditures that we're expecting our unborn children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren to pay. And that is really putting them into bondage, and it just isn't right. So we need to figure out how to deal with our social and economic problems in a different way rather than encumbering our the coming generations. So MP squared is based on a couple of key principles. First is we can solve our problems by becoming more productive. We can address poverty by becoming more productive. We can empower people with choices and resources. In order to do this, government needs to be more limited. And when we look at what's going on right now and some of the liberal policies in the country, we know that they don't work. Actually, the policies that we're using right now are based upon redistribution of wealth. And redistribution of wealth is actually causing poverty to increase. We spent trillions and trillions of dollars on trying to bring people out of poverty, and yet people aren't coming out of poverty. And the reason is poverty isn't coming from a lack of spending money. Poverty is caused because we're not giving people an opportunity to work. So rather than redistribute wealth, we need to redistribute work. So how you do that? That's what MP squared is all about. We're going to give you some examples about that. But most mainstream Americans believe in limited government. They believe that the people should be making choices over their medical care, education, that they should keep the fruits of their labors. But yet, in our country today, 60% of the federal budget is entitlements. It's redistribution of wealth. So why is it, though the majority of people believe a different philosophy than what is happening in our government? One of the reasons, to understand why this is if you imagine a football team, and I'm sure all of you have a favorite football team, that only played defense. If you only play defense, and every time you stop the opposing team's offense, you got the ball back and said, we don't know what to do with this. You know, we'll give it to you, you can have it. So mainstream Americans in my lifetime, and that's almost 60 years now, have very seldom ever had an offensive. They've talked about limited government, they've talked about the Constitution, they've talked about free market economics, but not too often. There's a few times that they've actually said, this is how we're going to implement it. This is how we're going to empower people. So just to give you an example of what that looks like, I'll give you a couple of examples. If you take an issue, for example, the economy, we all like a growing economy versus a shrinking economy. But the typical response to growing the economy is let's increase taxes or increase deficits to stimulate the economy, stimulate consumption. And the conservative response has been, no, we don't want to do that. That's not what we should be doing. They've just been saying no. They said, well, we're not going to do that. And what we're suggesting is in MP squared is that we should open up natural resources. You know, if we had access to timber in northern Idaho and we could open up our mines, we'd have jobs again. We could have more prosperity than you can imagine. There's a lot of people that have manufacturing facilities in China that love to come back if we'd reduce regulations and have America be a friendly place for people to produce and work. So let's take medical costs as another example. The typical response is we need another government program. Despite the fact that in 1965, when we started government programs of Medicaid and Medicare, it only took 5% of the GDP to pay for all medical costs. That's what it took. We're up to almost 20% right now, and it's largely because of these programs. It's not because of the intention of the programs, it's because these programs aren't based upon correct principles. And so the conservatives, you know, including myself, says, well, no, we don't want Obamacare. But MP squared is taking it another step, is we want to empower people. Now, how do you empower people? One of the best ways to do that is having more of the money go through their hands rather than through insurance companies' hands. So you have higher deductible policies, but you fund health savings accounts. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Another one is poverty. The liberal response is redistribution of the wealth. The conservative response is, no, that doesn't work. What we're saying is, let's give people opportunities, let's give them mentors, personal improvement plans, let's give them ways that they can reach a point where they can pull their own weight. So you kind of get the idea how that works. So basically, as you have more government, you have less freedom and you have less access to the fruits of your labors. If you have $100 and you don't have any obligations on that $100 and that's what you've earned, you can spend that $100 on anything you want to. You have freedom. If, however, taxes take 25% of it, then you've lost 25% of your choices. If they take 50% of it, you've lost 50% of your choices. If they take 100% of it, you know, you've just become a slave. So freedom is not possible without choices, and choices aren't possible unless you have access to the fruits of your labor. And that's one other thing I guess I should add here about MP squared. It really is a legislative agenda. It's based in a philosophy that's basically very traditional American values, limited government, free market economics, production. But it also is a legislative agenda of how to implement those ideals.
Thank you, Senator. I'd be curious to know what other members of the panel think of MP squared. And we can start right here with Senator Fulcher.
Thank you, Dirk. And I guess, you know, from my perspective, it can be explained kind of like this. Over the last years, decades, the whole term compassion has kind of been hijacked by the moderate to liberal mindset, and that term compassion has been somehow equated with government programs. And so if we're compassionate as leaders, that means we're willing to put in place a government program. But every time we do that, we're really redistributing the wealth, because we're taking from this person over here who has it or has earned it, and we're delivering it to this person over here who needs it, or supposedly needs it. And that's called compassion. And I guess part of what the MP squared message is real compassion is the ability to empower people to produce, give them the tools to produce and prosper. And so as we have these discussions tonight, I would just like you to think about that. Is it really compassion if we're creating a program and we're taking from these folks and giving to these folks, or is compassion the ability to allow people to produce and to prosper?
Thank you. Senator Vick?
Thank you. You know, I was going to say something along the lines that Senator Fulcher just mentioned, and that was talking about how do you really help people? And we probably have all heard the old Chinese proverb that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And I think that that's the goal that we need to have. You know, now we're on second, third, even fourth generation of people being on government assistance, whether that's, you know, welfare of some sort or whatever you call it. And I don't believe that was ever the goal of those programs, to help people. And so if you really want to help people, you need to move them. Not only do they do better and society does better, but they will feel better about themselves if you're being productive. And so I applaud the work that Senator Thayn and Senator Fulcher have done on this, and I think it's a step in the right direction.
I too think it's the step in the right direction. We talk about tools to make people more productive, but we also have to recognize that as legislators, we have a very important job to limit the bureaucracies, limit the administrative rules, limit the regulations that keep individuals from being productive. I often use the analogy that a young man should be able to start working in his garage on cars. He should be able to take neighbors' cars in, work on them there, learn on them there, and not have to worry about rules and regulations that will prevent him from learning the hard way about a business, a home business, a business that doesn't have to have licensing and rent and the rest of that. He's able to take care of that right at home, and then he can grow into a small business and have his shop and have his lifts and the rest of that stuff. It's the regulations that we find that are constricting individuals from the ability to perform. So when we talk about a legislative agenda, we talk about trying to rein in the bureaucracies and their rules and regulations so that we can allow the freedom. We talk about teaching to fish. Just let them fish.
Yeah.
But don't regulate what they put on the hook. Don't regulate how they do it. I mean, come on. Don't regulate every jot and tittle. So that's pretty much where I'm coming from with respect to this production.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Now, several of you have mentioned a legislative package, or that this could be legislation. How exactly does MP squared translate to the Idaho legislator? And I don't know if you want to start, Senator Thayn?
Well, I probably should, huh? Well, there's plenty of areas that it could start. In some of the areas that let me preface that a little bit, and I'll give you a couple of examples how we've actually been doing this in Idaho already. One of them is this has actually happened in the United States. Some of you are aware that, you know, Nagasaki was bombed in 1945 and it was completely destroyed. And at the time, the richest city in the world was Detroit. And you know, I listened to Bob McCowan, who's a former congressman, this last weekend, and he said, any poor country can become rich, and any rich country can become poor by adopting certain principles. And so Nagasaki, which was completely destroyed, embraced the idea that people should work. They allowed people to work. And if you look at Nagasaki today, it's a beautiful city. Skyscrapers, modern cities. But Detroit, on the other hand, decided, no, we're going to help people. We're going to redistribute wealth. And what it really has done is it's created a dependent society. There's violence. There's hundreds and thousands of buildings that have gone to decay. And it's because they don't let people you know, like Vito was saying, we don't need to regulate what they put on the fish hook. So as far as how to move this forward, where I started several years ago was in the field of education. And one of the things that we did 2 years ago is we actually addressed the problem, and that is how the cost of college is quite expensive, and how can we reduce that in half? Now, it's not going to help anybody in this room unless you're like 13 years old, but still. So it's an optional program. It doesn't cost the taxpayers any more money, but it depends upon the students doing more work. And how it works is if you'll begin in the 7th grade taking a full class load, and then the state will pay for 2 summer classes, online summer classes. If you do that, the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, by the time you're 11th grader, you can start taking dual credit classes. And you can take a year to 2 years of college before you even come to college. So that's how you start reducing the cost, by encouraging people to become more productive. These principles are not that difficult. And that's just one example.
All right, thank you, Senator. So is there any specific legislation in regards to education or anything that you guys might try and bring forward in this upcoming legislative session?
Well, I'll probably answer that one, since you're just throwing that out. Senator Fulcher and I both sit on the Education Committee, but education has been one of my passions. I don't think you can understand America unless you understand education. So that's where I've wanted to serve. One bill that we're going to bring forward this year is to allocate $200 to every junior and $400 to every senior to pay for dual credit classes. What we find when students have college experience while they're still in high school, they have a lot more success when they're in high school, when they're in college. And if you look at this, we're allocating the resources to people who work, motivating people to become more productive. It really is pretty simple, folks. And it can be done in lots of different ways. So that's one bill that we're going to bring forward this next session.
And would you like to?
Thank you. If I could just add to that. There's a couple of components to that legislation that Senator Thayn just talked about. And one, of course, is hopefully the motivation to the student to perform, but also as an encouragement to families and for parents to engage. One of the things that we have learned, or certainly I've learned, is the data it shows that there is an undeniable link between student performance and parental involvement. And over time, that parental involvement, I think, in part because of the entitlement type mentality, has been discouraged. And so as part of this legislation, we're hoping to tighten that link once again and encourage more of that parental involvement.
All right, thank you, Senator. Representative Barbieri shaking his head. Do you have any thoughts on
I
this?
have really nothing to add to that, other than I believe that part of the balance that Senator Thayn is talking about in terms of allocating resources, money, is that will offset even a higher expense. Is that not true, Senator?
Yeah, Representative Barbieri, that's true. What we sometimes don't look at when we look at the K-12 budget, kindergarten through 12 budget, is that we also spend money on college students in the state of Idaho. So if we can get 2 years done in 1 year's time, we're actually saving money when they go to college, because we're going to spend $5,000 on them there too. So when you start seeing the whole picture, one of the things that we tend to do in politics is we tend to look at issues in silos. We don't look at entitlement programs and education and roads, that they're interrelated. As entitlement spending has gone up, the amount of money that has gone that's left for roads has actually gone down. And I'd like to make one other point, and that is when we talk about making some reforms with entitlements or empowering people, we're not talking about cutting programs. So we're not suggesting that we do away with food stamps or Medicaid. We're suggesting if we ever did do away with them, first you need to build its alternative. So we start driving out the need for Medicaid. In fact, Medicaid is an issue that I think will come up at this next legislative session.
And Senator Vick?
Well, I have, excuse me, I have a point in another direction talking about legislation that doesn't necessarily make people more productive, but it does make people a little more accountable, and I think will help drive down healthcare costs, and that's related to how do you address the ever-increasing problem of health insurance costs and the medical care in general, the costs that drive it. And this may take a little bit of an explanation, so if you can bear with me for a few minutes. But if I had a chart up here, I could post two columns, and you have first party payer, second party payer twice, and then third party payer. And I like to, if you go out to buy something for yourself, that's a first party payer. And as a first party payer, you're concerned both about price and about quality. As a second party payer, you might be buying something for somebody else, for a gift. So you're concerned about price. You may not be quite as concerned about quality. Okay? And then a third party system is you're using money to buy something for somebody else. And so in that case, you're not really concerned about price or quality. And that's where our health, you're concerned about, and there's another type of system, and that's a second party, and that is where you're spending somebody else's money to buy something for yourself. So you don't care about the price, but you do care about the quality. And that's kind of where our healthcare system is. And what we need to do is to have you involved in the price and the quality. And we know this works because there's 3 areas or 4 areas of medical care that are really not covered by insurance. And those would be LASIK surgery on your eyes, plastic, non-reconstructive plastic surgery, dental care, and not that any of you use this, but it's still a medical service, and that's veterinary care. And in all of those areas, which are largely not covered by insurance, the prices have gone down or have not risen near as fast as the medical care that is covered by insurance. And so in order to get us to that point, we need to have those people who pay for the care more invested. It seems like my mic is cutting out. Is that just a P? Okay. We need to be more invested. So when we talk about raising the deductibles and giving health savings accounts, that's a way to transition out of this system where you would have, and if you're an employee, your employer may even fund your health savings account, but you have the ability then to keep the money that's in your health savings account, roll it over from year to year, and at some point maybe even keep that money that you didn't use for retirement or whatever. Then you're invested again in your healthcare decisions. You're concerned about the cost. Before you have a surgery, if it's not an emergency surgery, you check around. We actually have people that fly from this country to Mexico and Thailand and Eastern Europe for surgery now, because we were just told that a guy needed some reconstructive surgery. It was $250,000, and he flew to, I can't remember what Eastern European country he was, and had the surgery done for $25,000. We have doctors in this country that are setting up medical practices in Costa Rica and are doing what they call medical tourism. So you go to Costa Rica for your surgery and a little vacation because they can do things so much cheaper. So there's room in our healthcare system to cut costs, but the fact that many people aren't concerned, they're not concerned about the price because their employer pays for their insurance, and in many cases they don't really check into quality, they just go wherever they can. It's caused some problems. And this is a relatively recent phenomenon, because in the as late as the 1950s, over 80% of all people in this country entirely paid for their own health care. Very few of them even had health insurance. So it seems a little strange now, but that's the direction that we have to work to get us out of this system. The more government regulations to fix healthcare we can see isn't working, and this is a better way to go.
If I might, talking about regulations, especially with respect to the medical, the paperwork involved, the documentation involved, this drives up costs, it drives up overhead, and is driving doctors out of the practice. And that is pretty much across the board. The news media is picking it up, doctors are complaining about it personally, that they're leaving the practice. And it's not because they don't want less money, it's not because they can't handle the amount of stipend that the government or the insurance company will bargain with them. It's that they have to have so much staff to document everything that goes on. It's just not worth it. And that's what we're being told. The regulations require documentation to make sure that everything is done, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and it's just too expensive to do that.
Thank you, Representative.
I'd like to add one other thing. I asked my doctor a couple years ago, because I was trying to get to the bottom of why medical costs are so high, and there's quite a few reasons. But I asked him, if people pay cash, what would that do to your costs? How much could you cut them? He said 50%. So what I think we need to do is create a cash market. And you create a cash market by having more money go through the hands of individuals, or by funding health savings accounts. So you might ask, well, how do you fund a health savings account? Well, if your employer, if you work for an employer, and they could have a higher deductible policy and put some of the premium money into your health savings account. We actually, at the state level last year, passed a bill that allowed the state to fund state employees' health savings accounts. So if they choose a high deductible policy, they could actually get funded, have some funds into the health savings account. We got the bill passed last year. Now the goal for this year is actually to try to fund that about $2,000. So if they start having money in their account, then they can start negotiating and going out and getting cheaper prices.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Fulcher, do you have any thoughts on healthcare?
I think my colleagues put it in pretty good reference. If you put the money in the hands of the people, the responsibility and the accountability will play a major role in driving those costs down. The problem is the money is not in the hands of the patient. The money is not in the hands of the people. It's in some third party that is less interested, as we just learned.
So now, in regards to healthcare, how would MP squared address the Idaho State Healthcare Exchange, and/or how would MP squared deal with someone who's just had their policy canceled from Obamacare? And maybe we'll start here with Senator Fulcher and work our way down to the table.
Yeah, I will start with that. The MP squared approach is the antithesis of the path that we're on right now. The path that we're on right now is a heavily government administered, regulated path, which, as we've been discussing thus far, that's how you drive the costs up, is by having that money controlled by other parties. And so the MP squared path would be one which transitions that control back into the hands of the patient. Senator Thayn mentioned healthcare savings accounts. It's a very good tool. Creating those accounts that puts that money back into the hands of the individual and starts creating a little bit more of that cash-based mentality instead of everything running through an insurance company. So basically, it's an alternate path to what we've got and what's being implemented right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind commenting on that either. Actually, Senator Vick and I were in Dallas a couple of days ago, and we visited with a gentleman that had a pretty interesting ideas. we think there's some ways that we can negotiate around Obamacare. In some ways, the state health exchange debate, should have it, not have it, really isn't the answer. It really isn't the right question, because it's not going to reduce costs one way or the other. The federal government's in control both ways. But one bill that we did pass this last year that Senator Nuxel sponsored was so that, what do they call it? Yeah, it's health sharing ministries. Thank you very much. Health sharing ministries. I've been up a while today, so my mind might start going before too long. That's an exemption of Obamacare. So the health sharing ministries are 3 organizations that share each other's medical expenses. So if you join one of those ministries, you are exempted from the penalty from Obamacare, and you can. One of them, I think Samaritan Ministries is one of them. The gentleman that we met in Dallas also had another idea that piggybacked on direct primary care. Direct primary care is where you pay a certain amount of money to a doctor each month, and he will take care of your basic medical needs. And I need to finish finding this out, but according to him, if you're part of a direct primary care system, you could actually then be exempted from the penalty of Obamacare. You'd have those 10 essential services taken care of, and you could buy a high deductible policy, and we could kind of escape some of the negative impacts of Obamacare. So one of the things that we're trying to do, we're trying to solve problems. So we're trying to come up with ideas that we can give to the people so they know what to do, how to escape this. What we'd really like to do, what I believe, is that the rollout of Obamacare has been somewhat of a disaster. And I personally don't think it can work, because in any economic system you have to have rationing. So when we go buy cars, we self-ration because we can only afford so much of a car. You know, I have a little Ford Ranger because that's all I can afford. Russ here has a little bit more. My wife says I should have gotten rich before I got into politics, but anyway, we self-ration. Yeah, so some people appreciate that comment. Actually, I think we all do appreciate that, of our wives especially. But because the way we do politics actually isn't very profitable, you know, we'll stay off that subject. But anyway, and socialized medicine can work because there's a rationing mechanism. The government rations care. But under Obamacare, there's no rationing mechanism. There's no rationing mechanism. It's giving everything to everybody with no ration. Now, there has to be some rationing come in, but it can't work as it currently is, because economics, by definition, is unlimited demands with limited resources. So, kind of getting off on a couple of rabbit trails here, but we're trying to find solutions, and so I think as we move forward, if we understand what we're trying to do, which is empower people with resources, that there will be avenues open up that we can make that happen. But we have to know where we're going before we can get there.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Vick.
Yeah, and thank you. There is one other thing that we have tried and we need to continue to try to do, and that is give you access to what the cost of healthcare services are. Most of the time you can't call up the hospital and ask them how much a service costs. They will know at some point when they bill you, but there's no good way. If you go on, for instance, you want to go on Amazon and buy a book, well, or a new computer or a camera, you have like 10 choices, 10 different places, or maybe 50, or you can buy that camera and you know the price, and you know how good their service is because they're rated, and you can read reviews of the product and of the company that you're buying from. Is there anywhere in healthcare you can do that? No, there isn't. And that needs to be a part of this. And there has been legislation introduced to try to get the doctors in the hospitals to post those prices, but we haven't succeeded in doing that yet. But that is also a part of this.
Yes. Legislatively, we can create the mandate for transparency. It certainly should be easy enough with the ability of these hospitals and healthcare providers to simply post what's already in the computer system. It should be simple enough. But that, if they did that, then you wouldn't go where you're going to be charged $10 for an aspirin. And those are facts. That's not just some fantasy. One of the solutions that we're looking at, and we've been dealing with the Dr. Lowell Fennick, is a different animal, shall I say, than a health savings account, because a health savings account usually implies pre-tax dollars. And in order to keep the government away from that escrow account, that account that's set aside for your use on a first dollar basis for medical treatment, an escrow account. And not only can you use this escrow account as a first dollar for your medical treatment, but that escrow account could be reinsured, so that if a catastrophic occurrence, say $1 million occurrence, were to occur, you could have reinsurance against that escrow account, so that it's not medical insurance, it's simply insurance. A reinsurance policy, the Blue Cross, Blue Shield, these insurers have reinsurance so that they have a stop loss. They don't have to worry about the multi-million-dollar loss because they're reinsured. So we can use the same tools that the insurance company is using on a smaller scale. Employers could use it, employees could use it, and that way the money's coming out, first dollar yours. And the other thing about that is we keep talking about being able to save it. If it's inheritable and you don't have to spend it, and you know that it's going to go to your kids, all the less motivation to spend it if you don't need to spend it. And many of the burdens that are on the emergency units are important, are serious, but many of them are not. And that burden that's being placed on them, if we can figure out a way to make it so that that consumer realizes they're going to spend 10 times more money going to the emergency room than they would be going to a care clinic, they will make the wise choices. There's no education necessary. Just go one time and spend 10 times more than you needed to, and that's the lesson you'll learn. So these things can be taken care of legislatively. It's just a matter of getting the momentum and getting the taxpayers and the constituents moving in the same direction, that this is the way you want the legislature to work.
I might follow up just a little bit on that if I might, Dirk.
Okay, a couple of minutes.
You know, one of the reasons we're in the fix we're in is because we've all trusted insurance companies. We figured they were looking out for our best interests. That's really not the case. They're just a cost plus, meaning they want to pay their costs and have a little bit left over. It's a cost plus. So one of the driving forces of this last session on the health exchange was the insurance companies thought that they were going to get about $300 million every year from these subsidies. So there's a lot of money behind the politics of this. Well, what I'm trying to say is that if we can have a goal of reducing medical costs by up to 50%. Now, if that were to happen, in Idaho, we're spending about $9 or $10 billion a year on medical costs. So if we reduce medical costs by 50%, that would be $4.5 to $5 billion that would go into the pockets of the people. Well, what we were faced with last session was insurance companies that saw subsidies coming from the federal government of $300 million. When we start focusing on the needs of the people, we're talking $4 or $5 billion rather than just $300 million for special interest groups. So sometimes, at some point, the politicians have to stand up against the special interest groups and say, listen, we need to talk about what's good for the people of Idaho, and we don't need to make it what's bad for you, but I've got my 2 minutes already. But at a Farm Bureau convention here recently, a couple of the executives of Blue Cross came, and they were asked, will Blue Cross be in business in 5 years? And they said they didn't know. The executives aren't even looking out for the long-term benefits of their own companies. So we've got to stand up and say, what can we do to empower people? That's what our goal needs to be.
Dirk, one more technical point, not to make the insurance companies the bad guys. Just understand that corporations and their boards have a fiduciary obligation to maximize profits. And that fiduciary obligation means that that is the highest responsibility of the board. So when the insurance company doesn't know whether it's going to be in business in 5 years, that really cannot be their concern. Their concern is, are they maximizing profits? And in so doing, they may have put themselves in a position where the next step is a single payer system where the insurance companies are eliminated and the healthcare providers bill the government directly. So all I'm suggesting here is that it's not misfeasance or malfeasance, it's just the obligation of the board to make sure that that corporation makes money for its shareholders now.
Thank you, Representative. Now, I know we've touched on healthcare and we've touched on education. There's one more primary issue I'd like to get into. But before we proceed, does anybody have any questions from the audience? Go ahead.
I would really like to know what the panel thinks about the common core. It's a very broad subject.
Did you guys all hear the question?
Yeah, the question was, should I repeat it?
Yeah. Well, the question was in regards to Common Core. And so I think what we'll do in considering time is we'll start with Senator Fulcher, and we'll give you guys just a minute or two to address that.
It is a big topic, and I think probably maybe the most concise way to put it is the risk with Common Core is that it takes the responsibility and the privilege of educating our students outside of our immediate control. And so, bottom line is Idahoans, I believe, need to be in charge of the education systems that Idahoans obtain. That needs to be done here. Curriculum selection, data control, the test standards. If we relinquish that outside of our own control, then the information that's taught, the standards that are met, and the results that we have, and then the data that is attached to the students, we forfeit that. And so to try to take a very long subject and make it concise, I think that our number one concern is that the responsibility for Idahoans' education needs to be kept here in Idaho. So I have a problem with Common Core as it's currently being laid out.
Good.
I've written a couple of articles on Common Core, and I think Senator Fulcher explained it quite well. The number one priority is the state maintaining its control over education or not. And Senator Fulcher pointed out some of the areas that we need to discuss. We need to discuss them because when we okayed Common Core 3 years ago, it was during the time that the Luna bills were coming through, and we never had a discussion. We didn't even know what it was. So it's time we have that discussion. Secondly, I would like to see the role of parents be increased. Right now, if you really think about it, the parents in Idaho have no input or choice over what their children are learning. And if you really think about that, that's got to change. Some way we've got to figure out ways to empower parents so that they can either say, I don't want this curriculum or I want this curriculum. Because ultimately, unless the parents have some say and we can work within the system, the state can't tell the parents of the state of Idaho what they need to learn in order for us to continue to have a free society. So this is an issue we need to talk about, and I think Common Core is bringing that to the forefront.
And I would just like to give an example of why people are concerned about Common Core, and that is, and Senator Fulcher mentioned controlling the curriculum. Some of the English curriculum contains a discussion. You're supposed to have a discussion on the Cold War, and in this, and I'll do this to keep this short, and I know there's a lot of young people in here who may not be as intimately familiar, because I can remember when it happened, but when the Berlin Wall fell, President Reagan gave a speech, and a very challenging speech, and did many things, but he told the Soviet Union, he said, you need to tear down this wall. Well, in the Common Core curriculum, in this English section, and again, I'm not saying that Idaho is doing this in their curriculum, but this is part of the Common Core curriculum. They give credit to tearing the Berlin Wall down to Mikhail Gorbachev. He was in charge, but they say it was his open-mindedness and his desire to see the Soviet Union move forward that caused him to tear down the wall. No credit at all given to the President of the United States, and this is, of course, in our country we're doing this. So that's why so many people are concerned about Common Core. That's just one example, and there are others.
Thank you. We're told that these are just standards, and that standards do not drive curriculum. Something that anybody with common sense knows can't be true. And curriculum is everything. Excuse me. The issue should be what is being taught, not how it's being taught. Okay, I understand that that's important. I understand that data collection, well, I'm not so sure data collection from kindergarten to college on an individual identified basis is important. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about this whole idea of preparing students for work. School to work. This is going to lead to a disaster. It's going to lead to castes. It's going to lead to people being pigeonholed and being unable to move out of their own socioeconomic level. It's going to happen unless we can figure out a way now to stop it. In my mind, education, that is to say critical thinking, proper historical perspective, these must be the heart and soul of what is being taught in all reading, writing, and arithmetic. The misinformation that we're seeing coming out, excuse me, from some of these Common Core, that it's the president's job to make sure that laws are fairly enacted. This is crazy to me, and yet the facts are being blurred and misrepresented under the guise of English. And if we're going to continue with this same trend, then we can assume that there will be no education. It'll all be indoctrination. And the NEA has come out since the 60s saying that their job was not only to become the biggest, most important lobbying group, special interest group, but was to make sure that not just the United States, but the world students were trained to be world citizens. And the United States will not survive as it stands with its exceptionality if we are going to be dumbed down and become citizens of the international community.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any other questions at this time? Yeah, go ahead.
Ms. Barbieri, could you tell, you spoke about Dr.
Fennick.
Lowell Fennick, and his escrow program. And I've spoken with him about that, and I'm very impressed with the way he describes it. Could the other representatives and senators please tell us what their view of that type of alternative program is? And if you're in favor, what could possibly be done to further that in the legislature?
Did everybody hear the question? As I understand it, the question is in regards to Lowell Fennick and to potentially how to further his ideas for healthcare reform in Idaho, and to just get the panel's thoughts on that.
I'm off the hook.
And we'll start with Senator.
Yeah, I have talked to Dr. Fennick numerous times as well, and support the idea wholeheartedly. You know, the hospitals and the insurance companies are concerned about implementation and how it affects their bottom line. And as Representative Barbieri mentioned, that's their job. That's their top fiduciary interest. But that's the difficulty we have. We've not been able to get last